बराह रास्त कॉपी और पेस्ट करें। Story 1. This is the story of Megan, a 17-year-old from suburban Ohio who stayed late after school one Friday to finish a project in the art room, who heard footsteps in the empty hallway outside, who found every classroom door on her floor standing open when she left. Every single one. Except the one at the end of the hall that was always kept locked, which was open that night. And when she looked inside, found evidence that someone had been living in that room for months, and that the someone had been watching the students, including her, from inside the walls. My name is Megan. I am 23 years old now, but this happened when I was 17, junior year of high school. October. A Friday evening when I should have gone straight home after last period and did not. I was behind on an art project, a large mixed media piece due the following Monday. My teacher had given me permission to stay and use the art room supplies after school, as long as I signed out with the office before I left. I signed out at 3:30 when the building emptied. I was the last student left, or so I thought. Our school was a 3-floor building built in the 1960s. The kind of school that had been renovated twice but never quite modernized. Long corridors with lockers on both sides, linoleum floors that echoed, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly when the building was quiet. The art room was on the second floor at the far end of the north corridor. I worked until almost 6. The light outside the art room windows had gone dark. The building was completely silent. The particular silence of an institutional building after hours that is different from ordinary quiet. Heavier, like the building is holding its breath. I was cleaning up my supplies when I heard the footsteps in the hallway outside the art room. Slow, deliberate, moving away from me down the corridor. I stood still and listened. The footsteps continued, past several classroom doors, slowing near the end of the corridor, then stopping. I assumed it was a custodian. The building had an evening cleaning crew that came through on Fridays. I had heard them before, but usually I heard cleaning equipment, mops, carts, the sound of doors propped open. These were just footsteps, nothing else. I finished packing up and opened the art room door. The corridor was empty in both directions. All the classroom doors on my side of the corridor were standing open. Every single one. That was wrong. When I had walked to the art room at 3:30, every door had been closed. The teachers always pulled their doors shut when they left. Fire code. All 7 doors between the art room and the stairwell were now standing open. I walked toward the stairwell, looked into each open room as I passed. Empty. Dark. Chairs on desks, everything in order, except that the doors were open. I reached the stairwell door and was about to push through it when I looked to my right. The corridor continued past the stairwell to the end of the building. 3 more classrooms, and then the last door at the very end. Room 214. Room 214 had been locked for as long as anyone could remember. The story among students was that it had been a science lab that was closed after an accident years ago. Teachers did not discuss it. The door had no window panel, just a solid door with a keyed lock. In 3 years of walking that corridor, I had never seen that door open. It was open. Not wide, slightly, maybe 6 inches. No light from inside, just darkness through the gap. I should have gone straight down the stairs and out of the building. I walked to room 214. I pushed the door open slowly, reached in and found a light switch. Fluorescent lights flickered on. It was not a science lab. It might have been once, but what I was looking at had been converted into something else over a long period of time. A mattress on the floor in the far corner, old blankets, a pillow, a folding table against the near wall. On it, a camp stove, canned food stacked in a careful row, a plastic container of water, clothing folded neatly on a chair, a small battery-powered lantern. Someone had been living in this room. I stepped inside, looked around more carefully. On the wall above the mattress, photographs. Not printed photographs, photographs cut from what appeared to be yearbooks. Student photographs, faculty photographs, and among them, photographs taken through glass, through windows, of classrooms, of students in classrooms, of the cafeteria, of the hallways, taken from outside, from somewhere looking in. I looked more closely at one of the classroom photographs. My classroom, my art class. I could see the specific artwork hanging on the walls, the particular arrangement of tables, and in the photograph, me, sitting at my usual table, working, unaware. I left the room and ran down the stairs and out of the building, and did not stop running until I reached my car. I called the police from the parking lot. They arrived within 10 minutes. They searched the building thoroughly. Nobody found inside. But room 214 was exactly as I had described. The mattress, the food, the photographs. And one more thing the officers found that they told me about later. In the crawl space above the ceiling tiles of room 214, access to a ventilation corridor that ran the length of the building, wide enough for a person to move through, with sight lines through ventilation grills into every classroom on the second floor, including the art room. The investigation never definitively identified who had been living there, or for how long. The food supplies and the wear on the mattress suggested months. The photographs on the wall went back at least a full school year based on student faces that teachers identified. Whoever it was had found a way into a locked room in an occupied school building, had been living there, watching students through ventilation grills and through classroom windows from outside, had documented what they watched, and had never been detected for months. The school did a full security audit after that, changed every lock in the building, sealed the ventilation corridors, installed cameras in every hallway. I finished junior year and graduated. I have not been back to that school since. But sometimes I think about all those afternoons in the art room, working at my table in the particular quiet of after hours, thinking I was alone. And something above the ceiling tiles, watching me through the ventilation grill, completely silent, patient, while I worked below, never knowing. Story 2. This is the story of Tyler, an 18-year-old from rural Georgia, who was the last person to see his classmate Danny before Danny vanished from a school camping trip, who heard something outside his tent that night that did not sound like any of his classmates, who found Danny's sleeping bag empty in the morning, and said nothing for 24 hours out of fear of not being believed, and who has lived for 5 years with the knowledge of what he heard outside that tent and what he saw in the tree line when the clouds cleared and the moonlight came through. My name is Tyler. I'm 23 years old. I live in Savannah now. Different city, different life. But there is something from 5 years ago that I carry every day, and I need to say it out loud because I have only ever told one other person, and they did not believe me. I was a senior in high school in rural Georgia. Every spring our school took the senior class on a 3-day camping trip to a state park about 40 miles from town. It was a tradition that had been going on for decades, supervised by 3 teachers, 40 students. Campsites in a designated area of the park, trail hikes during the day, campfires at night. Standard stuff. Danny was my best friend since 7th grade. He was gone by the 2nd morning. We had been placed in adjacent tents, standard 2-person tents. I had a tent to myself because our class had an odd number of students. Danny shared with a kid named Marcus, who slept through everything and would not have noticed if the tent itself disappeared. The first night was normal. Campfire, teachers telling everyone to be in tents by 10. The usual noise of 40 teenagers pretending to comply and then whispering and laughing until midnight. By 1 in the morning, the campsite was genuinely quiet. I was almost asleep when I heard something. Not from inside the campsite, from the tree line about 30 feet north of where our tents were pitched. A sound. Not an animal sound, not a branch or wind. Something vocalizing. Low, inconsistent, rising and falling in a way that was almost like speech but not speech. Like someone trying to produce language who did not quite understand how language worked. I lay still and listened. The sound continued for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped. I told myself it was someone from another campsite, a drunk adult, someone sleep-talking loudly. I turned over and tried to go back to sleep. About 20 minutes later, I heard the tent zip. Danny's tent next to mine. The sound of a tent zipper opening slowly. I assumed Danny was getting up to use the bathroom. Kids did that on camping trips. Went into the tree line rather than walking all the way to the facilities building. I heard his footsteps in the leaves, moving towards the tree line. I heard him enter the trees, leaves crunching, then quieter as he got further from the campsite edge. I do not know why I sat up. I just did. I unzipped my tent and looked toward the tree line. Dark. The clouds were solid that night, almost no ambient light. I could see Danny's outline about 20 feet into the trees, standing still, not moving toward the facilities, not moving at all, just standing there. I watched him. He stood there for maybe a minute, then the clouds shifted just slightly, a gap that let through a pale wash of moonlight for maybe 15 seconds. Danny was not alone in the trees. Something was standing in front of him. Taller than Danny, who was 6 feet. Much taller. Standing very close to him, not touching him, but close. And Danny was standing completely still, arms at his sides, head slightly tilted. Not the posture of someone frightened or resisting, the posture of someone listening. The moonlight closed off, darkness again. I sat at the entrance of my tent for a long time. I could no longer hear footsteps, no longer hear anything from the tree line. After maybe 15 minutes, I went back inside and lay down. I told myself I had imagined the second figure, that it had been a tree, a shadow, darkness playing tricks on someone half asleep on their first night in the woods. I told myself Danny would be at breakfast in the morning. He was not at breakfast. He was not in his tent. His sleeping bag was there. His bag was there. His shoes were just outside the tent entrance where he had left them. He was not there. I said nothing. For the whole first day of the search, I said nothing about what I had seen. I was 17. I was terrified of saying I thought I had seen something tall standing in front of my friend in the middle of the night. Terrified of being called crazy, terrified of being wrong. I told one of the teachers on the second day, a young teacher named Mr. Collins who I trusted. I told him exactly what I had seen. The sound before Danny left the tent. The moonlight gap. The figure. He listened carefully. Then he told me to tell the police investigators exactly what I had told him. He walked me to where they were set up and stood next to me while I told them. The lead investigator took notes and asked questions. He asked about the direction Danny had been standing, the approximate height of the second figure, how long the moonlight gap had lasted. He did not look at me like I was crazy. He looked at me like he was writing down something he had heard before. Danny was never found. The investigation went on for 2 years. No evidence of foul play ever confirmed, no body, no trail that led anywhere definitive. His case is still officially open. I still think about that 15 seconds of moonlight. Danny standing perfectly still, head tilted. The posture of someone listening to something. Not afraid, not struggling, just listening. Whatever spoke to him in the dark outside our tent, whatever made that sound that was almost language, Danny heard something in it that made him get up and go outside, that made him walk into the trees, that made him stand completely still and listen. I do not know what it said to him. I do not know what he heard. I just know he never came back. And the way he was standing, he did not look like someone who had been taken. He looked like someone who had been offered something and had decided to go. I think about that most of all. Story 3. This is the story of Priya, a 16-year-old from suburban Texas who was assigned a locker that had been empty for 2 years because no student would take it, who found notes inside the locker on the first day. Notes from the previous owner. A girl named Sarah who had transferred schools 2 years earlier under circumstances no one would discuss. The notes described something Sarah had been experiencing, something watching her at school. The notes became increasingly distressed as Priya read through them in order. And on the final note, Sarah had written a warning, a specific warning, about a specific place in the school, that Priya had already visited that morning without knowing what it was. My name is Priya. I am 20 years old. I want to tell this story because I have looked for Sarah for 2 years and I cannot find her. And I think someone else needs to know what she wrote. I was a sophomore in a large suburban high school in Texas. September, the first week of school. When I went to the main office to get my locker assignment, the woman at the desk looked at the number on my form and typed something, and then looked at me with a slightly careful expression. She said that locker had been unassigned for a couple of years, that I was welcome to it, but if I wanted she could try to find me another one. I asked why it had been unassigned. She said some students just did not like the location, that it was at the end of a corridor near the back stairwell and not very convenient. I said it was fine. The locker was at the very end of the east corridor on the first floor, ground level. A back stairwell on one side and a fire door on the other. Not a high traffic area, a bit isolated, but I did not mind that. I opened it with the combination the office had given me. On the inside of the door, taped, a folded piece of notebook paper. I assumed it was from a previous student. People left notes and photos taped inside lockers sometimes. I unfolded it. It was dated from 2 years ago. September, first week of school. The handwriting was neat and careful. It said, "I am leaving this here in case anyone else gets this locker. My name is Sarah. Something is watching me in this school, and I need to write it down because I feel like if I write it down, I can think about it clearly." I read it twice. Then I looked deeper into the locker. At the back on the floor, a small stack of folded papers held together with a rubber band. More notes. All dated. Sequential. I should have gone to a teacher. I read them all standing at my locker between first and second period. The notes covered about 3 months of Sarah's sophomore year. The first few were observational. She described a feeling of being watched in certain parts of the school. Not general unease. Specific locations where the feeling was strong. The back stairwell by her locker. The girls' bathroom on the 3rd floor, second stall from the left. The storage room behind the gymnasium that was supposed to be locked, but whose lock had been broken for years. The space beneath the gym bleachers. She described checking these locations, finding nothing unusual, but the feeling persisting. The middle notes became more specific. She described seeing a shape in her peripheral vision in the back stairwell. Only in peripheral vision, never visible when she looked directly. She described her reflection in the 3rd floor bathroom mirror behaving incorrectly, looking a half second behind her actual movements. She tested it multiple times, described the testing in careful detail, concluded it was not her imagination. She described sounds from behind the gym storage room door on days when she could confirm the room was locked and empty. Sounds like movement inside. The later notes were shorter, more urgent, less organized. She wrote about not sleeping, about not wanting to come to school, about her parents thinking she was having anxiety issues and taking her to a therapist who told her the same thing. She wrote about feeling that whatever was watching her was getting closer, that the peripheral shape in the stairwell had started appearing in other locations. The final note was different from the others. Longer, more composed, like she had calmed herself to write something important. It said, "I'm transferring schools next week. My parents agreed after I stopped eating and started losing weight. I do not know if it was real or if I was having some kind of breakdown, but I'm writing this down for whoever is in this locker next. Do not go into the storage room behind the gym. I went in once in October when the lock happened to be broken. I wanted to prove to myself there was nothing there. There was nothing there. But on the wall at the back of the room, behind the shelving unit, someone had scratched something into the plaster. Names. I recognized some of them as students from our school. I recognized one name from a news story I had read. A student who had disappeared from this school 4 years ago. I do not know what it means. I do not know if the names are warnings or records or something else. I only know that after I went into that room, the thing in my peripheral vision was not in my peripheral vision anymore. It was directly in front of me, and it was looking at me. And I could not see it clearly enough to describe it, but it was there, and it knew I had been in that room. She signed it with her name and added one more line. "I'm sorry I cannot tell you more. I hope you never feel what I felt here. But if you do not go into that room. Do not let it know you know about it." I think that is why it got worse for me. I went looking. I stood at my locker holding that last note for a long time. Then I thought about my morning. I had arrived early. I had taken a wrong turn looking for the gym for PE first period. I had ended up at the back of the gymnasium. I had tried a door to orient myself. It had opened. A storage room. Shelving. Old equipment. I had backed out immediately and found someone to ask directions. I had been in that room, that morning, before I found the notes, before I knew what Sarah had written. I had already been in that room. I went to the school counsellor and gave her the notes. She read them carefully. She called Sarah's name up in the system. Sarah had transferred. No forwarding information in the records. Her family had moved out of state. The counsellor asked if I had gone into any of the locations Sarah mentioned. I told her about the storage room that morning. Her expression shifted slightly. She asked if I had touched anything in the room. I said no. I had backed out when I realised it was a storage room. She nodded, asked me to leave the notes with her. She called my parents that afternoon, said she was flagging the locker issue and reassigning me to a different one. She did not explain more than that. I got a different locker. I stayed at that school for 2 more years and graduated. I never had the experience Sarah described. No peripheral shapes, no mirror issues, nothing. I have wondered since if the storage room visit that morning, before I read the notes, meant something. Whether I had been in there and come out before it registered, before whatever was in there noticed me, or whether I was simply lucky. I found an address for Sarah 2 years ago through a mutual connection on social media. I sent her a message explaining who I was, that I had found her locker, her notes. She never responded. Her account went inactive 3 days after I sent the message. I do not know if she is okay. I do not know if she ever stopped seeing it. I do not know if leaving the school was enough to make it stop. But I have thought about that final note many times. The last line. I think that is why it got worse for me. I went looking. I was in that storage room. I was already looking without knowing it. And whatever was in there got a look at me too. I have to believe it did not find me interesting enough to follow. I have to believe that. Story 4. This is the story of Marcus, a 17-year-old from rural North Carolina, who was part of the stage crew for his school's fall play, who spent 3 weeks of evening rehearsals in the school auditorium, where the drama teacher told the crew on the first night never to go into the understage area during rehearsals, where Marcus began hearing sounds from the understage during performances, where he found a way in through a panel in the scenery room, and where he discovered that someone had been using the understage as a living space for years, and had documented every play the school had performed, and every student who had ever performed in them, in a collection that went back 30 years, and that included information that could only have been gathered by someone who had been present in that building, constantly, for decades. My name is Marcus. I am 22 years old. I grew up in a small town in rural North Carolina, population maybe 3,000. The kind of town where the high school is one of the largest buildings, and the fall play is a genuine community event. I was never interested in performing, but I needed an extracurricular for my college applications, and the drama teacher, Mr. Holt, accepted anyone onto the stage crew who showed up and was willing to work. I showed up in September of my junior year. I worked on 3 productions before I found what was under the stage. The auditorium was one of the oldest parts of the school, built in the 1940s, a proper theatrical space with a raised stage, fly space above, and an understage area accessed through 2 trapdoors in the stage floor, standard for that era of construction. The trapdoors had not been used in productions for years. Mr. Holt used the understage for general storage, old props, retired costumes, equipment from previous decades. On the first evening of crew orientation, Mr. Holt went through the technical setup of the space. At the end, he mentioned the understage almost as an afterthought. He said we were welcome to use the storage space up there, but to stay out of the understage during rehearsals and performances. I asked why. He said the space was cluttered, and he did not want anyone getting hurt in the dark under there during a live production. Reasonable enough. I did not think about it again for several weeks. The fall play was a standard production. Student cast, 3 weeks of evening rehearsals, then 4 performances. I was running lights from the booth at the back of the auditorium. During the second week of rehearsals, I started hearing sounds from below the stage. Not during scene breaks or when the cast was moving around above. During quiet moments, monologues, still scenes where the stage was minimally occupied. A soft sound, movement, like something shifting position. I mentioned it to another crew member, a girl named Becca who was doing sound. She said she had heard it too, assumed it was animals, rats maybe in the old storage. The sounds continued through the 3rd week, consistent, always during quiet moments, always from the same general area under stage left. Not random, not the irregular sound of animals moving through a space, the deliberate sound of something that was trying to be quiet, and occasionally was not quite quiet enough. On the final Friday before the first performance, I stayed late to finish adjusting the lighting cues. Mr. Holt had gone home. The cast had left. I was alone in the auditorium. I went to the scenery room at the side of the stage where we stored paint and tools, looking for a specific instrument for adjusting a lighting fixture.
While I was looking, I noticed a panel in the back wall of the scenery room. A low panel, maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, like an access hatch. Not locked, just flush with the wall. I pushed it. It opened inward, into the understage. I had a flashlight in my toolkit. I took it out and shone it through the opening. Beyond the panel, a low, dark space. The underside of the stage above me, the concrete floor below. Old props and costume racks, exactly as Mr. Holt had said, but further back, in the area beneath stage left where I'd been hearing the sounds. Something different. I climbed through the panel and moved toward the back. A cleared area amid the stored items. A sleeping mat, rolled sleeping bag beside it, not old, not dusty, recently used. A small folding camp stool, a battery lantern, a box of food, water containers. Someone was living under the stage. I swept my flashlight around the space. On the low shelving unit that had been part of the stage structure for decades, facing outward, binders, a row of them, 20 or more, each one labelled on the spine with a year, going back to the 1990s. I took the nearest one off the shelf, labelled with the current year. Opened it. A programme from this year's fall play, the one currently in rehearsal, not a public programme, those had not been printed yet. This was a handwritten list of the cast and crew with notes beside each name. My name was on the list, with notes. Marcus, stage crew, lights. Arrives Tuesdays and Thursdays by 5:15. Leaves last most evenings. Does not socialise much with the rest of the crew. Careful worker. Notes about me. Written by someone who had been watching rehearsals. From under the stage. Through the cracks between the stage boards. I opened another binder, 10 years earlier. Same format. Cast and crew list with notes. Observations about individual students, their habits, their relationships with each other. Who was talented? Who was struggling? Who arrived early? Who stayed late? I opened one from 20 years ago. Same. Detailed notes on students who were now adults somewhere in the world. Adults who had no idea that their high school theatre rehearsals had been observed and documented by whoever lived under the stage. I opened the oldest one, 1994. Same handwriting as all the others. The same handwriting. 30 years of binders in the same handwriting. One person had been living under the stage of my high school for 30 years, observing every production, documenting every student who had ever performed or worked crew. For 30 years. While productions happened above them, while students rehearsed and performed and laughed and cried above them, while teachers directed and corrected and encouraged above them, while nobody knew. I got out of the understage, got out of the auditorium, called the police from the parking lot. They found the space exactly as I had described. They found 30 years of binders. They found food that had been purchased recently. A receipt in a bag from a grocery store 12 miles away, dated 3 days before. They found worn paths in the concrete floor where someone had walked the same routes repeatedly for years. They found a small periscope-type device, homemade, that could be inserted through a gap between stage boards to see the stage from below while remaining invisible from above. They never identified who it was. No DNA match in any database. No fingerprints matching any record. Whoever had been living there for 30 years had never been arrested, never been fingerprinted, had no official existence in any system. The production was cancelled. The understage was sealed permanently. Mr. Holt resigned at the end of the year. I do not think he knew, but I think maybe he suspected something and had chosen not to look too hard. The "never go under there during rehearsals" instruction, said too casually, like a rule passed down from whoever was in charge before him, a rule meant to keep students from finding what I found. The oldest binder was from 1994, but the shelving unit the binders sat on was original to the building, built in the 1940s, and the worn paths in the concrete, worn smooth by years and years of foot traffic. The police said 30 years based on the binders, but binders from before 1994 might have been stored differently, or destroyed, or somewhere else entirely. I do not know when it actually started. I do not know how many students were documented before the oldest binder. I do not know what the documentation was for, who it was meant for, what it meant to whoever was keeping it. What I know is that for my entire childhood in that town, something was under that stage, watching, writing it all down. Every fall, every spring, every student who ever stood in the lights and spoke lines and thought they were being watched only by the audience in the seats, never knowing about the eyes in the floor. Story 5. This is the story of Emma, an 18-year-old from suburban Michigan, who was a senior class president at her high school and had access to the administrative wing after hours for student council meetings, who found an unlocked filing cabinet in the records room one evening that contained student files. Normal at first, grades, attendance, and then a second drawer that contained something else entirely. Files on students who had never attended the school. Names she did not recognize. Photographs, handwritten assessments, notes that described behavioral observations in language that sounded clinical but was not from any professional she could identify. And in the bottom of the drawer, a file with her name on it that had been started on the day she was born. My name is Emma. I am 22 years old. I want to tell this story because I have tried to report it 4 times, and I have been told 4 times that the filing cabinet I described does not exist and never existed, and that the records room in my high school does not contain anything I described. I know what I found. I need someone else to know. I was senior class president at a large suburban high school in Michigan. Part of the role came with a key card that gave me access to the administrative wing outside of regular school hours, for student council planning and events. I used this access regularly for meetings that ran into the evening. The administrative wing was quiet after 5. Most staff had gone home. The main office was locked, but the hallway with the conference room and several adjoining offices was accessible with my card. On a Tuesday evening in November, I arrived early for a student council meeting that had been pushed back an hour. I had 45 minutes alone in the administrative wing. I had been working on a proposal for a new student program and needed data on student attendance patterns. I knew the records room was down the hall from the conference room. I had seen staff go in and out of it, never been inside myself. I tried the door, unlocked. I went in. A small room, no window, metal filing cabinets along 2 walls, a computer terminal on a small desk, a printer, standard records storage. I was looking for attendance data that would support my proposal. I found the filing cabinet labelled Attendance and pulled the drawer. Current year files organised by homeroom. Exactly what I needed. I found what I was looking for and made notes. The filing cabinet beside it was unlabelled. No label on the cabinet itself. No label on the drawer. I should not have opened it. I opened it. Student files. Same format as the attendance files at first glance. Manila folders, names on the tabs. I flipped through a few. Photographs, handwritten notes, assessment style language. But wrong. The language was observational in a way that student files should not be. Subject demonstrates above average social awareness, tendency toward leadership behavior, responds well to peer approval, notable empathy levels, potential for influence over peer groups. That was from the first file I opened. A student I recognized. A girl 2 years below me. Not a school counselor's language. Not a teacher's language. Behavioral assessment language. The kind you would find in a research study. I flipped through more files. Every student in the files had a similar assessment. Observations about their behavioral tendencies, their social patterns, their responses to various situations, written in the same hand throughout. All of them current students or recent graduates. Then I found the second drawer. Different files in this drawer, thicker, older looking,
I pulled one. A name I did not recognize. A photograph of a child, maybe 10 years old. School photo style. I checked the school ID number in the corner. Not a format our school used. Not a format any school I was familiar with used. I checked our school's online directory later that night and confirmed. This student had never attended our school. The file contained years of observations, from early childhood into adolescence. School performance not from our school, from multiple schools. Following this child across institutions. The handwriting the same as the first drawer. I pulled another file from the second drawer. Another unknown name. Another photograph. Same format. Years of cross-institution observations. I pulled 10 files. None of the students attended or had attended my school. All had been observed across multiple schools over years. All had detailed behavioral assessments written in the same handwriting. I went back to the first drawer, looked more carefully at the names, found a pattern I had not noticed initially. Some files in the first drawer were current students, normal. But some files in the first drawer were students I had known who had left the school unexpectedly, transferred, moved away. A few who had simply stopped appearing without clear explanation. I went to the back of the second drawer, the oldest files, going back decades. The same handwriting throughout. And at the very back of the second drawer, a file thicker than the others. I pulled it. My name on the tab. My school photograph. This year's. And behind it, older photographs. Me at various ages. Not school photographs. Candid. Taken without my knowledge. Me at maybe 7 years old at what I recognised as a park near my childhood home. Me at 12 at a school event. Me at 14 in what appeared to be our backyard. I opened the assessment section. The observations began on a specific date, the date of my birth. 20 pages of documented observation going back 18 years. My childhood described in the same clinical observational language as every other file. My developmental milestones, my social patterns, my school performance across every year. Information that could not have come solely from school records. Information that described events at home, in public, in private. The most recent entry was dated 2 weeks before that evening. It described a student council meeting I had attended, my contributions to the discussion, my interactions with specific other students, my apparent emotional state, written by someone who had been in that meeting, or had been watching it. I took photographs of everything with my phone, put all the files back, left the room, went to my meeting, sat through it without hearing any of it. I reported it to the school principal the next morning. He asked me to show him the room. I took him to the records room. The unlabelled filing cabinet was gone. The 2 drawers of files were gone. The cabinet had been replaced with a standard, labelled cabinet containing exactly the kind of records you would expect in a records room. He told me, very gently, that I might have been in the wrong room. That sometimes students under stress imagined things. That senior year was difficult. I showed him the photographs on my phone. He looked at them for a long time. Then he said the image quality was too poor to make out the contents clearly, and that I might have been looking at standard student files and misread the contents. I reported it to the school district. Same response. I reported it to the police. They came. They checked the room. They found the standard records cabinet. They were kind, but clearly did not believe what I was describing. I reported it one more time to a journalist at a local paper. She came to the school with me. She saw the records room. She did her own research. She told me she could not find anything that corroborated my account, and that without the physical files, she could not publish anything. That was the 4th time. I stopped reporting it after that. But I have the photographs. They are not high quality, he was right about that. But I know what I was photographing. I know what I read. I know my name on that tab. I know my face in those photographs taken throughout my childhood. And I know that file began on the day I was born. 18 years of observation before I ever set foot in that school. By whoever had been observing the students who ended up in that second drawer, following them from school to school, institution to institution, documenting them for years before they arrived. I do not know what the documentation is for. I do not know who removed the cabinet between my discovery and the next morning. I do not know how they knew I had found it. But I have thought about something consistently in the 4 years since. The files in the second drawer. The students who had been observed across multiple schools over years, and the students from my school who had left unexpectedly. What happened to them? Where the files on them ended? Whether the documentation was observation only, or something more active? I do not have answers. But I know my file began the day I was born, which means whatever this is, it identified me before I could identify myself. And it has been watching ever since. 5 students, 5 high schools, 5 encounters with something that had been present in those buildings for far longer than any of them knew. Megan finished her junior year and graduated. She works in graphic design now. She told me she thinks about the photographs on the wall of room 214 sometimes. All those student faces, all those years. And she wonders about the other photographs, the ones of classrooms and hallways, whether there were other students in them who never knew they had been watched, whether any of them ever felt something was wrong. She thinks most of them did not. Tyler still lives in Savannah. He still carries that Tuesday night in October. He told me he looked up the state park online last year, read through old visitor reports, old local news from the area. He found one brief mention in a county paper from several years before his camping trip. A report of unusual sounds near the campground. A ranger who had investigated and found nothing, but had described the sounds as not consistent with any known wildlife in the area. Tyler did not tell me what he felt when he read that. He did not need to.
Priya never found Sarah. She told me that 2 years after she graduated, she went back to her old school for a friend's younger sibling's performance. She walked past the east corridor, past where her original locker had been. Out of habit, she looked at the end of the corridor. The old locker was still there. Different combination now, different student, but the same locker. She said she stood there for a moment and thought about whether the new student had ever felt anything strange in that corner of the building. She did not go looking. She remembered the last line of Sarah's note. She went to the performance instead. She did not go looking. Marcus never found out who had been living under the stage. The police investigation stalled without an identification. The case was eventually filed inactive. He told me he sometimes thinks about those 30 years of binders. The handwriting consistent across all of them. One person.
30 years of watching student productions from under the stage. He said the thing that stays with him is not the strangeness of it. It is the dedication. Whatever it was, whatever it wanted, it showed up every fall, every spring, without fail, for 30 years. That kind of commitment to watching without being seen. He cannot make it fit into any category he has for human behavior. And he has tried. And Emma told me one more thing. She said that in the 4 years since finding the files, she has occasionally had the strong feeling of being watched. Not paranoia, something more specific. The feeling that comes when you are being observed by someone who knows you very well. She said it happened most recently, 2 weeks ago. She was at her workplace, a large open-plan office in Detroit, mid-afternoon. She looked up from her desk and had the feeling so strongly that she stood up and looked around. At the far end of the office, a man she did not recognize was standing near the photocopier. He was looking at her. When she looked directly at him, he looked down at the machine. She walked over to ask who he was. By the time she reached the photocopier, he was gone. She asked her colleague in the nearest desk if she had seen the man. Her colleague said she had not seen anyone near the photocopier. Emma went back to her desk. She looked at the photographs on her phone, the ones from the records room 4 years ago. She found the image of her own file, the most recent entry, the one written 2 weeks before she found the cabinet, describing a student council meeting. She read the last line of that entry again. Subject continues to demonstrate exceptional observational capacity, awareness level increasing, transition point approaching. She did not know what transition point meant when she first read it 4 years ago. She still does not know what it means. But it has not stopped. That is what she wanted me to say. She wanted whoever is listening to know that whatever was in those files, whatever began observing her the day she was born, it has not stopped. And she is not the only one with a file. High school is supposed to be a safe place. Walls that belong to you for 4 years. Hallways you know by heart. Teachers who know your name. The particular comfort of familiarity. We move through those buildings every day, trusting that the only eyes on us are the ones we can see. The teachers, the friends, the cameras in the corridors. But some buildings are older than the trust we place in them. Some walls have seen more than we know. Some spaces have been occupied longer than any record shows. And some of what watches us in those years was watching before we arrived, and is still watching after we leave. Patient, quiet, writing it all down. Good night.